2004 was a massive year for gaming. It saw one of the most stacked competitive launch lineups in history at that point. It saw the release of GTA San Andreas, Halo 2, Doom 3, Metal Gear Solid 3, World of Warcraft, Ninja Gaiden, Fable, Killzone, Monster Hunter and the original Star Wars Battlefront. But a little over 20 years ago, saw the release of arguably the most anticipated game that year, a follow-up to the breakout success that was Valve's first game, Half-Life, a game which was revolutionary at the time for its unparalleled level of detail and interactivity, and its greater focus on its narrative and environmental storytelling. It released to universal critical acclaim, getting perfect or near-perfect scores across the board from every major publication at the time, and to this day is viewed as one of the most important games ever made. Valve had their work cut out for them to follow up after such a monumental release, but after a difficult development cycle riddled with changes, delays and leaks, Valve finally cranked out Half-Life 2, November 16th, 2004, and history repeated itself again. It released to universal acclaim with perfect or near perfect scores across the board, praise going to its graphics, physics, gameplay, its characters and character animation, and its story. It won 39 Game of the Year awards that year, and in the 20 years since its release, it's arguably overtaken its predecessor in its influence on gaming and pop culture. But Half-Life 2 itself is, in gaming terms, prehistoric. It's ancient, elderly if you will. It's got creaky knees and a Zimmer frame, but with all that in mind, how does it hold up? Does it, after all these years, still deserve the love it gets? Or does it need taken out the back and put down? Well, I'm glad you asked, and I'm glad to tell. Half-Life 2 has less in common with its predecessor than most sequels I've played. While most of Half-Life's unique goodness comes across the two, much more has been altered or improved with the change in engine. The original Half-Life ran on the Gold Source engine, which itself was a modified version of the Quake engine, and Half-Life retained a lot of that Quake DNA, while still very much its own thing. A fast-paced FPS blended together with the more original, thoughtful side. You weren't some Rambo stand-in spitting supersonic death at demons from hell, with the only thing likely to be slowing you down being your character's massive steel balls. You were an egghead, a nerd. Dr. Gordon Freeman, an employee at the secretive research facility Black Mesa, during a particularly bad day at work. I mean, we all have one of those days from time to time, but I'd be pretty sure our bad day doesn't really cover unintentionally causing the biggest fuck up in human history, the Resonance Cascade, leading to an alien invasion from another dimension. Your plan is simple: get to the surface, get help, fighting your way through aliens, the army, and a government Black Ops cleanup crew. While Half-Life had fast twitchy gunplay like Quake, it also had puzzles and a cast of characters. It attempted to simulate real-world physics to mixed success, and it puts its narrative front and center with an actual story unfolding as you progressed. What starts with you just trying to get out of the facility, ends with you fighting through an alien dimension, Zen, and killing the leader of the invasion, the Nihilanth, before being whisked away by this Agent Smith-looking ass, the G-Man. He set this whole caper into motion so his employers could get control of Zen, and because we did so well, he gives us a choice to work for him. Given that your options are either work for him or die, it's pretty obvious what we're gonna pick. We're hired and put in stasis until he needs us. Half-Life 2 picks up 20 years later. The G-Man brings us out of stasis, where we find that the world has been much changed in the aftermath of what they called the Black Mesa incident. Earth was engulfed in portal storms. Xenian creatures continued to flood through, even with their leader gone. But the storms brought the attention of something far worse. What followed was the worst war in human history. In 7 hours, these new invaders had scoured the Earth of all resistance. Humanity was saved only by the discovery of a way to communicate with these new invaders by Wallace Breen, the former administrator of Black Mesa, who offered Earth's unconditional surrender to the Universal Union, or as they were known by those who lived under their rule, the Combine. Breen rules in the Combine's stead as interim administrator of Earth, though as nothing more than a puppet. 2 begins in the creatively named City 17, Breen's headquarters on Earth, and takes us through a full-scale revolution against the Combine. Half-Life 2 has one of the best realised worlds in all of gaming. It was a technical marvel for the time, and the opening of the game shows it in all its glory. More surprisingly though, Half-Life 2 ran remarkably well on machines at the time, and this was despite the fact it was the best looking game that came out that year, if not ever. The only game which really even came close was Doom 3 with its awesome lighting, which is also held up beautifully, but in pretty much every other metric, Half-Life 2 had it beat out visually, and while Doom 3 has remained relatively unchanged since its original release, with the only real exception being the BFG edition, which depending on who you ask was actually a visual downgrade, Half-Life 2 has been getting subtle but noticeable visual upgrades over the years since it came out. It actually has only gotten better with age, and overall it's aged remarkably gracefully. Though it's been overtaken graphically long ago, Half-Life 2 was never going to be the best looking game on PC for very long, but it absolutely makes up with it with its fantastic world and atmosphere. Half-Life 2 is a very visually distinct game. Beyond small pockets of beauty every now and then, Half-Life 2 as a whole is very drab and moody. It'll take you to horribly polluted waterways in Water Hazard, an abandoned mining town, Ravenholm, the lonely rural seaside in Highway 17, a Supermax prison, Nova Prospect, the war-torn ruins of City 17 during the uprising, and the enormous Combine megastructure, the Citadel, in the game's finale. And it's all brought together by some genuinely god-tier art direction, and a great deal of its story and themes are communicated through its world, with not all that much said by the characters and the plot themselves. Gordon himself is entirely silent as he was in the previous game. Instead, it's through environmental cues where the most can be learned about the world, its history and the state the Combine have left it in, and why they need to go. Rivers are polluted and radioactive. The oceans are all but drained, leaving ships beached on what was the seabed years earlier, and everything else beyond Combine-controlled settlements has been abandoned by all but madmen, the truly desperate and displaced life from Zen, which has carved niches in the isolated wilderness or threw in their lot with humanity. It's a sad, tragic, lonely world. The audio is just as effective here as the visuals. Half-Life 2 and its episodes rely a great deal on atmospheric effects to give them a sense of tone. This world is desolate, and you can hear it as much as you can see it. A faint wind whistling through dead trees, the creaking of far-off rusting structures worn down by time, distant waves crashing weakly against the shore of a silent coastline, inhuman howls, distant gunfire. Whatever the occasion, these games will have you believe it. While music is used sparingly, it hits a lot harder when it is used, and it has a lot of range. It can go from moody and somber to absolutely riveting. But it's never overblown or over the top. There's no cliched, massive operatic scoring when you do something cool. It's still distinctly Half-Life. There's a desperation to it. It's a perfect fit for the game. While not as appealing to listen to in isolation as something like Halo's soundtrack, for instance, at least for me personally, due in large part to how very experimental Half-Life 2 and its episode soundtracks are, and how inseparable they are from the gameplay of the section which they're found in, it accomplishes exactly what it needs to when it is used. Thematic depth and environmental storytelling isn't all it has to it. Half-Life 2 has a great traditional narrative as well, with some really good and memorable characters, plenty of twists and turns, betrayals and redemptions. Half-Life 2 is a story, at its core, about oppression and rebellion. The Combine rules Earth as a surveillance state. They see everything, they control everything, food, water, and fertility. And the weight of this oppression wears down the average Joe. They're separated from family or any friends they make regularly. They're depressed, malnourished, some are so filled with chemicals they put in the water they can't even remember why they hated the Combine in the first place. And due to the suppression field the Combine have thrown up, the youngest of them are said to be humanity's final children, leaving them hopeless, completely reliant on the Combine system, never able to rebel even if they wanted to. Others eventually sell out and betray their own species and become an agent of the system, joining Civil Protection, which isn't so much a police force as it is the boot the Combine used to kick the rest of humanity down, all for the promise of a full, proper meal, seeing their family, or just to get their rocks off. But in the time since the Black Mesa incident, Gordon has developed a near messianic reputation amongst the citizens and has become a powerful symbol of freedom and rebellion. A powerful enough one to inspire a hopeless populace to actually rise up against the Combine, a force generally believed to be unbeatable. The Combine know it, throwing everything that they have at us to snuff Gordon out, only proving every time they fail to the downtrodden that they're not invincible and that they can be beaten if they take up arms and fight them. Half-Life 2 takes you through this uprising, always a step ahead of the Combine the whole time, striking at vital facilities and eventually inspiring a full-scale revolution against them. While the majority of the time you're going to be by your lonesome, lonesome, you'll occasionally come across friends, old and new, who'll help you on your way, and foes to get in your way. The scientists from the first game return, distilled into two different characters, Eli Vance and Isaac Kleiner. Barney Calhoun, the character we play as in the original Half-Life expansion, Blue Shift, returns as a wisecracking mole in civil protection. Dog, a makeshift protector, pieced together from salvaged scrap and Combine technology. The most important of the lot is Alex Vance, who's not only the poster girl for the Source Engine's, at the time, crazy expressive facial animations, which have held up fantastically, might I add, but she'll also join us as our companion periodically through the main game and basically through the entirety of the 2 episodes. She's such a fun character. She's bubbly, she's likeable, she'll help you out with combat, offer words of encouragement, or give you hints from time to time. She's also really the emotional core of Half-Life 2. When her father gets captured around the halfway mark, when Judith betrays the Resistance and then redeems herself, when Breen meets his end in the finale, we see how it affects her rather than Gordon. And as her and the player go through thick and thin, you'll grow more fond of her, and she'll be growing more fond of Gordon, and by extension, us. It's a very naturally evolving bond that isn't phoned in, so when she eventually does go through the ringer, and fuck, she will, you really do care. But no game would be complete without some good villains, and Half-Life 2 has some great ones. The Combine are a fantastic overarching antagonist, a cold, clinical sort of evil, concerned only with unending expansion and consumption, viewing the species they encounter as little more than bacteria or insects, completely and utterly beneath them in every conceivable metric, fit only to be improved to fill a gap in the Combine's near-endless military machine and have what unique technology they possess absorbed to augment the Combine's already nearly boundless knowledge and power, all in an effort to rule over and control all of existence. While the Combine are larger than life, their face or faces to the world are anything but. Dr. Wallace Breen and Judith Mossman are, well, they're human, with their own motivations and plans. Breen, the collaborator, a traitor to his species who believes the Combine can and will improve humanity, and is ready and willing to do whatever it takes to see this future into being. And the turncoat, Judith Mossman, who betrays the Resistance perhaps out of a personal grievance or a desire to be on the winning side, only having the change of heart when she found out she chose the wrong one. Though in the case of Judith, it's pretty heavily implied she may have actually been a triple agent for Eli, with her betrayal and capture of Eli likely playing part in an elaborate scheme to get the walking WMD that is Gordon Freeman to the Citadel, knowing Gordon would come to rescue Eli, and more recently Alex, who coincidentally was also captured, giving him the prime motivation and the perfect position to bring down Breen's regime and cripple the Combine's hold on Earth. Judith, either way, ends up being more of an anti-hero, willing to do questionable things for the greater good, or having an intact enough moral compass to decide to do the right thing when the chips were down. Breen is the most intriguing of the two, at least to me personally. We are led to believe that he's a power-hungry, manipulative opportunist who sold out his own species for power and authority in the new order the Combine were building, and yet, at the same time, seems genuinely concerned for the well-being of the human race, viewing cooperation with the Combine not only as the only chance to ensure humanity's survival, but as a massive opportunity as well, to accelerate humanity's progress as a species. You would be led to believe he's a true believer, using propaganda to spread the word that the Combine are humanity's saviors, liberating them from a more primitive, primal side. But as a puppet, I always questioned whether or not Breen actually believed everything he was saying. His concern for humanity I do believe, but I've always questioned his position on the Combine themselves. The reason humanity yet still exists in Half-Life 2 is because he struck a deal with the Combine, an act no one else seemingly had the courage to do, an act which has left him reviled and hated by his own species as a traitor, even though were it not for his actions they wouldn't still draw breath to curse his name. Breen values humanity and likely has done all he can to persuade the Combine down a gentler path. The truth is he was dealt a bad hand and chose the lesser of two evils, submission or extinction. Breen is unquestionably a villain. He stands counter to us for the entire game, but his villainy I don't think is born of malice. The Resistance and Gordon Freeman himself will, in his view, guarantee humanity's extinction at the hands of the Combine. All his work to persuade them of the species' value will be wasted, and he fears for the future. While in the end he was wrong, with humanity managing to break free from the Combine's rule, in a way the only reason humanity had a chance to break free from the Combine was because of Breen. Half-Life 2 may have a good story, but it's still a gameplay-driven experience first and foremost, and for the most part Half-Life 2's gameplay has aged like wine. though it does have a few rough spots here and there which show its age. What always kind of amazed me about Half-Life 2 was the sheer amount of variety it was able to pack into its gameplay. You can go from solving puzzles and exploration to balls to the wall action set pieces and firefights, to full-on survival horror, to commanding an army of bugs or rebels to fight alongside you on a dime. And because it's so well paced, it all flows together seamlessly. The moment Valve even thinks a section is overstaying its welcome, they throw a completely new one at you, with new rules, new things to learn, new enemies to face, and new weapons to face them with. And it's Half-Life 2's unique Half-Life-isms which have aged the best. The oddball elements that make Half-Life Half-Life. There's a chapter early on in the game, Water Hazard, where you pilot an airboat. While admittedly the physics for it are janky as hell and always were, this section plays like a Hollywood blockbuster. It's full of these absolutely fucking insane set pieces. One moment you're dodging bombs from an attack helicopter, the next minute artillery shells are taking out buildings in front of you. The chapter ends with you shooting the damn helicopter out of the sky, and this is one continuous set piece through half of this chapter, and control is never taken away from you. And don't forget, this is a 20-year-old game. Most games even still can't pull off a continuous set piece without making it a glorified QuickTime event or throwing a dozen cutscenes at you in the middle of it. And like, yeah, it's cool watching my character do cool things in a well choreographed cutscene, but I'd rather just do the cool things myself. There isn't that same disconnect with the character that way. You are Gordon Freeman. When he does something cool, it's you that's doing something cool. And I think that's pretty cool. And then, 20 minutes later, it'll pull a 180. Now it's a horror game focused on atmosphere and a slower, more deliberate pace. Ravenholm is Half-Life 2 at its absolute best for me. It's this eerie, abandoned mining town whose only living resident is an insane priest, filled to the brim with slow, shambling headcrab zombies, makeshift traps and physics objects. Ravenholm, more than any other part of the game, showcases Half-Life 2's amazing physics and interactivity and incorporates them as a main gameplay element. Ravenholm is where you first get to properly use the gravity gun, and it's also the first time physics feature in a big way during combat. While you can still use your weapons, ammo is scarce in Ravenholm, so you're heavily encouraged by the environment to get creative, using traps spread throughout the town, and using everything and anything from saw blades to cinder blocks as your weapons with the gravity gun. There really isn't anything quite like Ravenholm. Its focus on using the environment as your weapon hasn't really been matched anywhere else in gaming, and it's the part of Half-Life 2 I always look forward to the most when I'm running through it again. Later, we'll end up in Nova Prospect, whose entire premise as a chapter is storming a prison complex with a swarm of bugs and sicking them on the guards with a living squeaky toy. If that rundown sounds completely batshit insane, it's because it kind of is. There's nothing particularly complex about how all this works. The antlions are only really good for attacking or as a simple distraction from the guards and the automated turrets set up around the prison, but you're gonna need them because without them you are massively outnumbered and massively outgunned. The Combine are entrenched here, and while you can just brute force your way through this section, you're kind of missing out if you do. Not only is it easier, it's also just more fun to sit back and let the bugs cause chaos and then mop up what's left. The benefit of Half-Life 2's unique gameplay elements being so original, either in their concept or in their execution, is that those elements have barely aged at all and still hold up well even today as original, impressive and creative. Where Half-Life 2's gameplay ages itself the most was never going to be in what it does different, but rather in what it does the same as its contemporaries. Half-Life 2 is, at its heart, a first-person shooter, a pretty great one at the time with a big arsenal of weapons, clever AI, and a revolutionary physics engine. But the thing about original elements like the gravity gun is that they weren't and still aren't really emulated all that much by most other games, which keeps those elements as an experience that only really Half-Life 2 can provide. But the 2000s to 2010s were riddled with first-person shooters, a lot of really good ones as well. Half-Life 2 is in an awkward position because, as a trendsetter, it influenced many contemporary shooters of the time, but because it was a trendsetter, it was also pretty quickly overtaken by many of those other games, which placed a heavier emphasis on their gunplay and how weapons felt, what weapons you had, how enemies engaged with the player, and how difficulty affected the experience. Half-Life 2 has been overtaken long ago in all of these separate ways, to different degrees, and it's left the gunplay as the one element of the game which does show its age. Let's start with the weapons. The game, as I mentioned, has a good arsenal to play around with, everything you might expect: melee weapon, pistol, SMG, magnum, shotgun, grenades, a sniper crossbow, an assault rifle, a rocket launcher, but also more exotic equipment, the antlion lure, and more importantly, the amazing gravity gun. It's a good, well thought out lineup mechanically, where every weapon has its own separate role in combat. Nothing is completely redundant, save for the crowbar, rest and piss. But it doesn't change the fact that with the exception of a few weapons in the arsenal, it's overall a strangely bland lineup lacking in personality and character, especially compared to how creative literally everything else is in the game. After the invasion of an interdimensional empire whose entire MO is to absorb and modify species and their technology to improve them, I find it kinda hard to believe they looked at early 2000s human weapons and thought, these are perfect, we have no improvements, mass produce these puppies. Where's the modified versions of all these weapons the Combine have come up with? As it stands, there's one Combine designed weapon you can use, the AR-2, the Combine taking an assault rifle, and it's sick, I love it, I want more like it, but there is no more like it. On the Resistance side, there's the gravity gun and the Resistance crossbow, which both have really cool designs, having this very slapped together look, which fits right into the world. But these examples make the rest of the arsenal seem even more out of place and generic, and it's not just a lack of character. Most of this arsenal doesn't really stand out from other weapons of the period mechanically either. They're all serviceable, decent, nothing offensive, but nothing life-changing either. While a few of the weapons do have secondary fire modes, much like the weapons themselves, most of them just do the job. Fire a grenade, discharge both barrels of a single-barreled shotgun, that's a tube valve, and the oh-so-riveting zoom-in. The pulse rifle, yet again proving it's built different, fires a ricocheting energy ball which disintegrates any enemy it hits. It looks awesome and you can get creative with it, and that's really key to what makes Half-Life 2's coolest weapon tick. The gravity gun. The gravity gun is frequently cited as one of the coolest weapons in gaming, but that doesn't do it justice. It's not just a weapon, but an invaluable tool for solving puzzles as well. With the exception of the head crab, it can't do any direct damage. Creativity and thinking outside the box is key to using it effectively as a weapon, grabbing enemy grenades and pulse rifle energy balls and launching them back, building makeshift barricades and using props as a shield from damage, and yeah, just picking up a sink and launching it at a stampeding monstrosity at Mach 12. While it does have some minor context issues when grabbing certain items if they're clumped together tightly, it doesn't change how awesome this weapon is to use, and it does add a lot of flavour to the combat where normally it would just be a straightforward shooting match. Half-Life 2 in this episode, much like the original Half-Life, have a well fleshed out roster of enemies which can be split into three main enemy types. The Combine, who are built almost entirely around ranged combat. You'll be spending most of your time fighting Combine soldiers, who will either want to keep you at range or close in depending on which weapons they're equipped with. Drones like automated turrets are stationary but output insane damage, whereas manhacks attack in groups and are highly mobile and want to get into melee range. The Combine also use heavy duty alien units like the gunship and the Strider, both of which can only be killed using a rocket launcher. The Strider's the straightforward one. While it's packing some serious heat, just hit it with a rocket launcher a couple of times and it'll go down. The gunship is another story. Given it can shoot your rockets out of the sky, it makes fighting them a bit of a hassle. A fun one, but a hassle, especially when they can throw two at you at once later on. Headcrabs and headcrab zombies are another main enemy type. Most, like the standard and poison zombie variants, are slow and plodding but quite resistant to damage. Others, like the fast zombie, move, well, fast. Headcrabs have a few different variants as well. The standard type, weak, slow and mostly defenseless. The fast variant is functionally identical except that it's way quicker. And the poison variant, it's the slowest and tankiest. It's able to reduce your health to 1 temporarily using neurotoxin, allowing you to be quickly killed by any stray damage heading your way. Antlions are the last and the smallest group overall, with only 2 enemy types in the main game. The warrior, a fast, agile enemy capable of flight. While individually weak, they're never encountered alone. And on the opposite side of the scale, the guard, a large imposing creature which is very tanky, does high damage and can charge at you to close the distance with the player. Essentially, it's a bullfight with guns and a big alien. With a decent roster of enemies, some fun and innovative weapons and great pacing, Half-Life 2's combat is not bad, but as a point of reference for just how good combat could get during this era, allow me to introduce Fear, released in 2005, just under a year later. Now granted, I'm not going to claim that Fear is even in the same ballpark of importance or industry impact as Half-Life 2, because it's just not. It's a far more simplistic game in most ways. Its story is neither as interesting nor as well realised. Animations are janky as hell at times. Visually, minus some really impressive lighting, it's aged worse than Half-Life 2. And generally the environments are a lot more mundane than what you would see in Half-Life 2. But there is one element that Fear dunks Half-Life 2 on, and to be honest, pretty much every other FPS that decade, and that is the gunplay. In Half-Life 2, not counting how they interact with physics objects, weapons don't have overly that much effect on the environment or on enemies. Hit a wall, there's a bullet hole, there's a brief bit of debris. Explosions send objects and enemies flying, but the explosions themselves aren't very satisfying to look at. In Fear, every bullet tears up the environment. Hit a wall, plaster and dust explode out of it. You hit a box of paper or a filing cabinet, there's paper flying everywhere. Explosions annihilate everything around them and look properly impressive. In Half-Life 2, if you kill an enemy with a powerful or explosive weapon, it sends them flying, and the ragdolls are fantastic. But when an enemy takes a bullet, there's a little spurt of blood, and that's it. Enemies don't really flinch all that much and just kind of stand there and take it as you mag dump them in the face until they eventually just kind of collapse with no fanfare. In Fear, weapons are dismembering enemies, spraying blood everywhere. They flinch far more when they're shot, and when they die, they can still be spraying their weapons as they drop. It's the AI as well. Half-Life 2 has pretty great AI. They take cover, use suppressive fire, flush you out of buildings or cover with grenades, they can flank, use ambushes, and more besides. Fear does all of this, but better. They're a lot more reactive than the Combine soldiers, constantly analysing the situation and responding in an organic way, based on changing circumstances. They're always on the move, trying different strategies and engaging from different positions. They might hide from you in darkness, bunker down behind cover and blind fire, or even just play dead before shooting you in the back. It's really impressive. It even goes so far as how Half-Life 2 and Fear approach difficulty differently. In Half-Life 2, normal difficulty keeps the combat at an even pace. Enemies die quickly with most weapons, but it's much too easy. Gordon is too much of a bullet sponge, and you'll basically not die if you play your cards right. And now, granted, I've played this game many times, but honestly, I don't really see anyone new coming into the game struggling on normal either. I prefer to play on hard difficulty these days, but it comes with its own set of problems. Half-Life 2's hard difficulty does something I generally don't like to see with harder difficulties in games. As the difficulty increases, enemies don't get smarter, they don't gain access to more advanced abilities, they don't get more aggressive, they just do more damage and take more damage. This may not sound like a big deal on the surface, but it has a dramatic effect on the combat's pace. It slows it way down, and it doesn't make it any more difficult really, it just makes it more tedious and samey. The player is still a bullet sponge on hard, just slightly less of one, and now most of the enemies are bullet sponges as well. You'll mag dump a Combine soldier and they'll just take it on the chin as if nothing happened. Not only does this affect the pace of combat, it also affects how weapons feel to use. Spoiler alert, it makes most of the arsenal feel pretty weak, and the 2 or 3 weapons which aren't weak will be getting all your attention for the rest of the playthrough, which makes it just plain repetitive. Half-Life 2's difficulty options don't have a good middle ground between challenge and fun. Not to harp on about Fear, but Fear's approach is better here as well. Difficulty in Fear only affects enemy weapon accuracy and aggressiveness. That's it. Your weapons still feel dangerous, they don't suddenly become useless with the new difficulty, and enemies don't take 5 standard business days to die. They drop just as easily on the hardest difficulty as they do on the easiest. The only difference with difficulty is that they'll get progressively better at laying you the fuck out. Half-Life 2's combat being the only element which stands out as lacking in any way, given the game's age, is a testament to just how well it's held up as a whole. And though I have been quite hard on it here, there's still a lot of fun to be had with the combat in the game. It has plenty of original ideas and things that aren't seen that often elsewhere, but as a pure first-person shooter, it's very much a product of its time. Half-Life 2 ends on a cliffhanger. You overthrow Wallace Breen and bring down the Citadel, dealing a hammer blow to the Combine on Earth. G-Man congratulates us on a job well done, freezing time long enough to pull us out of the exploding Citadel, but leaving Alex behind. He places us back in stasis, informing us that we may or may not ever be employed by him again, and we roll credits. Half-Life 2, to this day, leaves a very strong impression on the player, long after they've finished it, and leaves you with the sense that you've played something truly special. Half-Life 2 is an excellent game I would recommend to anyone, and though it is a little rough around the edges, it has, for the most part, aged like wine. Half-Life 2 went on to receive 3 additional bits of content. The first released on October of the next year, Lost Coast. Lost Coast's premise was simple. Gordon wakes up in a small coastal village the Combine have occupied. They have an artillery launcher and an old Orthodox monastery at the top, and we have to fight our way to it and destroy it. Lost Coast was originally supposed to have been a chapter in the Highway 17 section of the game, but was cut before release. Valve reused the level as a tech demo, showcasing the at the time new HDR lighting added to the source engine. You can complete the entire game in like 15 minutes. The gameplay is identical to the main game, nothing new has been added. The main draw of Lost Coast back in the day was the integration of HDR rendering, and the entire setting is built around accommodating it. The town is gorgeous and very atmospheric. There's a far greater focus on not only the placement and properties of light and shadow, but also the amount of light and shadow that are placed around the map. That said, the main game had HDR patched in after Lost Coast released, and Episode 1 and 2 ran on an updated version of the source engine, which included it by default. So the main draw of Lost Coast, the HDR, isn't all that special anymore. As it stands, it's a fun and brief little bit of extra content to play through, and you should, but it's hardly life-changing if you don't. The first substantial bit of content added to Half-Life 2 was Episode 1, released June 2006. After Half-Life 2's long development cycle, Valve pivoted to an episodic model to expand upon Half-Life 2 going forward, allowing for content to be released more quickly. Episode 1 is often overlooked, put alongside Episode 2, but I have a major soft spot for Episode 1. I love its setting, it might actually be my favourite of the three. Episode 1 picks up literally 5 seconds after Half-Life 2's ending. Alex is frozen in the moment the Citadel reactor explodes and she's left to die by the G-Man, but fate had other plans for her. She's taken to safety by a group of Vortigons, and those same Vortigons manage to rescue Gordon from stasis. The G-Man, up until this point, has never been portrayed as anything other than in complete control of every situation he's in. His power is immense. His mannerisms, his speech, his appearance all indicate he's something more than just a man, an alien, or something else entirely, with mastery over the laws of reality. In a meta sense, he commands more power than the player does over the game. His appearances are the only time the player loses control of Gordon. He keeps an eye on our progress throughout the game and guides us along the path he desires. We have no ability to act independently of him, but these Vortigons seem to have an advantage over the G-Man for the moment, severing our connection to him. For the first time since the original Half-Life, G-Man has no control over Gordon, and so no control over us, and he's none too pleased. Episode 1 is a race against time. We wake up outside the Citadel, reunited with Alex. The Citadel is going critical, and we have to escape the city, but to do that, we have to stabilise the Citadel's core to buy us enough time. Snatching a vital transmission from Judith Mossman, which Combine have been holding, on our way out, a transmission the Combine are hell-bent on getting back. We fight through the collapsing ruins of the Citadel and later through whatever's left of City 17, levelled in the fighting between the rebels and the Combine, to an outbound train. It's a good bit more samey than the main game with the environments you'll be going through, but it makes up with it, at least for me, with its undeniably apocalyptic vibe, which I really jive with. The inside of the Citadel has been devastated, doomed to eventually collapse under its own weight, the technology used to create it turning against itself and lashing out at friend and foe alike. Alarms blur and the Citadel's AI issues its final commands over and over again, as if reliving the moments before its destruction. The once organised hierarchy and military machine of the Combine has descended into total chaos, trying desperately to escape the collapsing wreck. The world beyond has been annihilated in the fighting. Combine striders stalk through burnt-out husks of buildings, trying to root out rebel forces, and Combine soldiers and rebels trade fire in the streets, both equally desperate to escape the doomed city. Antlions and headcrab zombies take the opportunity for easy prey, hunting both sides down now that the city's defences have failed. And right in the middle, naturally, is us. While the plot is definitely more simplistic here than in the main game, it makes up with it with the company. Alex gets her character fleshed out and expanded even more. If she didn't already manage to win you over in the main game, she will here. She's given plenty of great and sympathetic character moments and basically carries the plot on her back. Her relationship with Gordon taking centre stage. Episode 1 does more of the same with its gameplay as the main game. Combat, puzzle solving and exploration broke up by occasional set pieces, though with some additions and improvements. Alex's AI is way better now. She's more able to help the player, being able to reprogram Combine ruler minds. She can help us by sniping in certain sections, temporarily pick up more useful weapons, and is far more survivable in combat, less likely to overextend and die, and generally more dangerous to enemies. We also have a couple of new enemies, the Stalker, who isn't all that interesting, he just really fires lasers at you and is a minor inconvenience at best. And the Combine Zombie, the Zombine, who'll rush you like a kamikaze. Existing enemies are also generally a little sharper now as well than they are in the main game. They're less likely to do dumb things, with better level design helping to shore up any issues that the AI might have. Most levels are functionally more of the same from the main game, but episode 1 has its own standout moments. Near the beginning you end up in the zombie and antlion infested underground tunnels. While they're not quite as good as Ravenholm, its closest equivalent, it nails a lot of the same elements very well, while adding its own little spin. The underground is pitch black, ammo is pretty scarce, you have a torch but it's got a limited power supply, and it's also shared with your suit power, which means if you sprint, it also runs down your torch. There are plenty of flares spread throughout the map which do help, but it is something you still have to keep track of. It makes for a fun little bit of light resource management when you're running through the chapter, and something it has in common with Ravenholm, there's a lot of fun to be had with a gravity gun. The underground is littered with physics objects, and in a fun little bit of interactivity, flares can be used to set zombies on fire, and antlion burrows can be blocked up using cars to prevent more from spawning. The hospital sequence is another standout section, which sees you shooting down a pursuing gunship, having it crash in through the ceiling before getting into a three-way brawl between us and Alex, the Combine, and hordes of zombies. Scripted and more spontaneous moments come together to make it just good, chaotic fun, and it's the best firefight of the two games so far. The finale has us facing down what can only be described as a coked-up Strider in a train yard. While the sequence is heavily scripted and is pretty much a combat puzzle, heavily leaning on trial and error in a way that can often feel a bit cheap, it's pretty cool as a spectacle. Strider can use its warp cannon to destroy and displace the cargo containers spread throughout the arena, sending hazards into your path and pressuring you out of safe spaces and into its line of fire, all while you're being harassed by Combine soldiers and struggling to get a clean line of fire on it to take out the Strider before escaping on the train out of the city. While it does have its problems, it is a fun way to round off Episode 1's gameplay. Much like the main game, Episode 1 ends on a cliffhanger. Gordon and Alex escape the city on board the train, but only moments before the Citadel reactor explodes, obliterating the entire city, with the train only putting some distance between it and the city, with Combine advisor pods, briefly glimpsed earlier in the game, trying to do the same. The train quickly gets caught up in the blast, and we fade to black. Episode 1 in a nutshell is flawed, but on the whole it's a really enjoyable experience with plenty of standout elements. Is it as good as the main game? No. Is it still a hell of a lot of fun? Yeah. It gets a kind of undeserved bad rap in my opinion. My only real issue with episode 1 is an unavoidable consequence of it being an episode of a larger story, which is to say it's pretty short, clocking in at 2 to 3 hours depending on if you take your time or not. Episode 2 was the second of the planned 3 episodes of the Half-Life 2 saga, released October 2007. Episode 2 is considered by pretty much everyone, myself included, to be the better of the 2 episodes, which matches or occasionally exceeds the quality of the main game. While Episode 2 is around the same length as Episode 1, it's a hell of a lot more substantial in the story department. Gordon wakes up sometime after the crash on board what's left of the train after the ending of Episode 1. City 17 has been leveled by the Citadel's detonation, and a super portal is beginning to form over the ruins of the city, a portal directly connected to the Combine overworld that can be opened wider, allowing the Combine to reinforce Earth via portal code embedded in the transmission from Judith that Alex picked up in the last episode, and the Combine wanted back. We have to reach the Resistance base in White Forest, where the Resistance has been constructing a rocket which can destabilize the portal, and we have to get there before the Combine do, or humanity's finished. This is the last hurrah, the last chance to cut the Combine off from Earth. But things get a little more complicated. Alex is critically injured in the first chapter by a newly introduced Combine enemy type, the Hunter, and she's gonna die if we don't get her some help. Luckily, a band of Vortigaunts, which might have been the same group which helped Alex and freed Gordon in episode 1, offer to help heal her, but our little detour sets us back long enough that by the time we reach it, the Combine are in White Forest store. And in the time that the Vortigaunts are distracted with healing Alex, the G-Man makes his return, reasserting control over Gordon, and an interesting twist, Alex, a character it turns out that has been subtly manipulated by the G-Man since she was a child, far longer than even Gordon. What his goals are now aren't fully clear. He left her to die at the end of the main game, but since she survived, she still has some sort of part to play in his plans, and we have to make sure she gets to White Forest at all costs. What part she's playing in his plans isn't all that clear, but there is a deeply sinister undertone to the whole thing. And as the ending will show, his plans don't seem to be in keeping with mankind's best interests. Despite being central to the plot, Alex is only really present as our companion in the second half of the game. Our companion for the first half is a Vortigaunt, the Victory Mine Vortigaunt. He doesn't even get a name. Seriously? Well, we'll have to correct that. From now on, he's Vorti. Vorti fulfills much the same role as Alex does in the previous 2 games. He assists in combat, gives guidance and hints, and generally keeps you company. While he's very different from Alex, he's just as good in his own way. He's a total bro. He has plenty of personality, is emotive in a fun, alien way, he'll banter with the player with some great dialogue, and is just a real wealth of knowledge, throwing all sorts of quirky, fun, world-building info at the player the whole time. He's great. The only other major new character is Dr. Magnuson. I love him. He's such a passive-aggressive asshole, but never to the point where it feels overdone or where he's actively dislikable. And he bounces off and banters with the other more mild characters in Eli and Kleiner really well. What Episode 2 also has going for it over Episode 1 and even the main game is the visuals. Episode 2 is gorgeous for a Source Engine game. It has so much more variety in its environments than Episode 1, and the environments are a lot more interesting to look at than the ones in the main game. You go from lush verdant woods to abandoned mines to massive underground caves. It's bright, colourful, and it's just flat out more appealing to look at to the eye. Gameplay, as with Episode 1, was pretty much unchanged, with a handful of new additions, starting with the Hunter, which I mentioned before, an alien combine unit, fast, agile and very hard to kill, heavily resistant to gunfire and explosives, but vulnerable to blunt force trauma, leaving the gravity gun as by far the most effective tool in your arsenal for dealing with them, letting you get creative with what physics objects you can do the most harm with. Hunters do a ton of damage with their explosive flechette launchers, but you can even turn this against them, lifting a physics object to block their projectiles before launching them and the prop which blocked them back at the Hunter. There's a new basic antlion enemy, the Acid Lion, which is a more evasive ranged variant of the standard antlion enemy. Rather than trying to get closer to you, it's constantly trying to keep you at a distance. The only other addition is a unique fluorescent green antlion guardian, central to a set piece about midway through the game. But other than that, it's mostly unchanged. Tankier, it can do poison damage, that's about it. Set pieces have been refined and improved further on from Episode 1, and honestly the main game too. Nearly every section has a set-piece moment worth talking about. Early on, Vorti and Gordon descend into the antlion nest in search of antlion larval extract, which the Vorticons can use to heal Alex, attracting the ire of a glowing antlion guardian, which calls the cave home. Gordon is separated from Vorti at some point, leaving us stuck in the tunnels with the Guardian alone, and it's constantly on the prowl for us. The entire section has us running from safe spot to safe spot, with it just behind us the whole time. While pretty simple in concept, I can't really do justice to just how tense it can end up being, having to reach a safe spot with it maybe only a couple of feet behind us, its footsteps getting ever louder as we make a mad dash for an antlion burrow it can't fit into. It's fucking terrifying. Or maybe it's not even around, but the chance it can appear at any time keeps the tension going. It's a great section in a game filled with awesome set-piece moments. The chapter Riding Shotgun has not only just the best combat of the 3 games with the excellent Hunter firefights, but also maybe the best set piece as well. Gordon and Alex stumble into a barn running across a strange, unassuming grub-like alien, a Combine advisor, only briefly glimpsed during the previous 2 games. Turns out we were lucky we didn't meet one earlier. It leaves us and Alex helpless with its psychic abilities, able to effortlessly crush metal and throw us and Alex around as if it was nothing. It would have had no problem killing both of us. Luckily an explosion leaves it injured and it has to flee through the ceiling, tearing the barn to bits as it escapes, and alerting Combine units to our presence. We end up in a running firefight to get to the car, trying to escape Combine troops, and end up with a Hunter chopper on our tail. The section is pretty similar to the one from the main game with the airboat, but dialed up to 11. The chopper isn't just going to be dropping bombs, it's also using environmental elements in front of us as a weapon. Eventually we end up leading it to a rebel outpost, but with no rocket launcher we have to get creative to shoot it down, so we have to use a gravity gun to fire its bombs back at it. It has a kick-ass soundtrack, and the whole thing from start to finish is such a fun set piece. Episode 2's penultimate chapter is essentially one big set piece from the moment we reach White Forest. We stumble into a fight between Dog and a Strider, which ends with Dog glory killing said Strider, but about 10 minutes later, a Combine army show up to invade the base, first trying to get a foothold inside with Hunters and soldiers, and when that doesn't work, with a squadron of Striders and Hunters. In a similar section to the Strider battle from the main game, a section which I didn't mention previously because while it's a good idea and it has its moments of cool spectacle, it's kinda slow and tedious. The Striders take far too much damage to kill, and there's far too many of them to kill, making the section drag on longer than it should have. This section takes that idea and makes it fun with a couple of great changes. Striders approach in waves, 1, 2 and then more at a time. Mechanically they're exactly the same as they were in the main game, except that their focus is not on us primarily, but on destroying White Forest itself and the vital supply of buildings around the base, laying waste to them with warp cannons, sending debris every which way. The Striders themselves aren't tedious to fight anymore, able to be taken out with a quick 1-2 combo, firing a type of sticky bomb at the Strider's hull, the Magnuson device, and detonating the bomb by shooting it with any gun, killing the Strider instantly. But getting one of these bombs off isn't exactly easy either. The Striders have Hunter escorts which will shoot the bombs off the Strider's hull and skirmish with the player and rebels to keep them away from their Strider. Hunters are probably the most enjoyable enemies to fight out of any of the 3 games, and Striders are finally enjoyable to actually fight. It's a perfect match, and they complement each other beautifully. It's stressful, it's exciting, and it's a fantastic send-off to a fantastic game. Likely the most controversial element of Episode 2 is its ending. It's yet another cliffhanger, but this time with no payoff. In the off chance that you haven't been on the internet and gaming circles for the last 15 plus years, Episode 3 never released. We still don't have a resolution. Judith's transmission ended up being the gift that kept on giving. Not only did the portal codes work, with the super portal collapsing giving humanity a fighting chance against the Combine on Earth, it also had something more embedded in the static, the location of the Borealis, an Aperture Science research vessel studying portal technology. Aperture Science will be a name familiar to fans of Portal, the sister series to Half-Life, set in the same universe. But to cut a very long story short, Black Mesa and Aperture Science were competitors. One was interested in teleportation and the other in portal technology. While Black Mesa had the Black Mesa incident, Aperture had the Borealis going missing with all hands, but it seems to have reappeared at some stage since the 7-hour war, and Judith found it. Whoever has control over it will win the war on Earth. Whether it's to be destroyed or used, it has to be found. But let's be honest, this is all much too cheery to be in Half-Life 2. Eli sends Gordon and Alex to find the ship, seeing us off before we leave, but as everyone's saying their goodbyes, the party's ambushed by 2 advisors hidden nearby, and they're able to extract the location of the ship from Eli's mind before killing him. Dog manages to drive them off, but much too late. Alex is left devastated by what's happened to her father, and the Combine have the location of the ship and a head start on us. And the worst part of the lot, G-Man was probably the one that set it all in motion. Roll credits. Episode 2 is probably the height of the Half-Life 2 saga. It takes everything good about the other games and refines it. It's tight and well-paced, action-packed, and it takes the story in a really interesting direction. But because its ideas were never seen to their conclusion, the entire saga is, well, it's incomplete. It never got the ending it should have had. It's something you have to bear in mind going in. You're not going to walk away satisfied. You'll be left at a loose end, wondering in the end how it all would have turned out. But in a testament to just how beloved these games actually are, despite the fact that they were never finished, people have kept waiting for 17 years. Not for Episode 3, that boat sailed long ago, but for Half-Life 3. Through a mixture of hope and cope rivaled only by Bloodborne fans, people have stuck around, hoping against all hope that maybe this'll be the year Valve finally counts to 3 and cranks out Half-Life 3. And for everyone still standing, our patience may have finally been rewarded. At last there are rumours, whispers, scuttlebutt if you will, that Half-Life 3 may actually be real, and we may actually get it this century. Though I have my doubts personally, until it's in my library. It's still a dream. Very few games could ever hope of having a legacy even approaching that of Half-Life 2 and its episodes. It's a must-play, a rite of passage for anyone on PC. And though it's old, it's kept alive not just by Valve themselves, with them recently cranking out the anniversary update, but by a dedicated community of modders and content creators that will never let these games die. Improving everything from the combat with the fantastic M mod, visuals with the upcoming RTX Remix mod, continuing on or expanding on the story Valve left unfinished with Episode 3 mods and projects based on the script for the episode, Epistle 3. Or the fantastic Entropy Zero mods, retelling the story of the hunt for Judith Motzman and the Borealis from the perspective of the Combine themselves. And even, oh, I don't know, porting the entire game into VR, because why the fuck not? Not to mention that Gmod, Source Filmmaker, the fantastic remake of the original Half-Life, Black Mesa, just wouldn't exist without the Source engine, and by extension, Half-Life 2. I love these games dearly, and I hope someday we can have a conclusion for them. Though for now, I hope I at least did them justice. Give them a fair shake, and more importantly, that you enjoyed listening to me waffle on for a rather long time about them. If you did, like and subscribe, it helps me out a lot, and in the comments, tell me whether or not you'd like to see a follow-up to this video, diving into the amazing mods and the utter insanity that is a workshop for Half-Life 2 and its episodes. For now though, I hope you enjoyed, and as always, take it easy, and cheerio.